I once believed I was just a reporter chasing lost stories. But what would you do if your own face appeared in an old VHS right at the scene of a disappearance forgotten for 26 years? When your mother calls you by the name of the dead. When every trace of you is erased and a chilling whisper warns, forget who you are and you'll never leave. If you think this is just another family story, you're dead wrong. Subscribe now for more shocking films from us. A snowstorm had its own way of swallowing up the world. And on that night in December 1997, the woods around Maple Hollow Inn disappeared beneath a curtain of white. Wind battered the eaves of the old building, rattling windows in their frames. Icicles like daggers clung to the porch roof, and the only sign of life was a dull glow leaking from a battered neon sign out front, vacancy. At a distance, the inn looked almost welcoming, a relic with crooked charm hunkered down in the endless snow. Up close, it was just another lonely building waiting out the storm, its secrets sealed behind frostbitten walls. Inside a faded blue sedan, crawling up the icy road, Jordan kept both hands white-knuckled on the wheel. The headlights barely cut through the swirling snow. Eliza sat next to him, cradling a map that may as well have been blank, while Miles in the back drummed restless fingers on a duffel bag. All three were supposed to be halfway to Seattle by now, chasing the shape of a road trip story they'd always promised to tell. Instead, they'd taken the scenic route, and the storm had caught them. "Don't worry, it's not the end of the world," Eliza said, voice a little too bright. "It's just a flat tire in the middle of nowhere. We can make it a good story." Jordan forced a grin, but he could feel every muscle in his arms twitching as the car skidded around a hidden patch of ice. For a second, he thought the wheel would lock up for good, but the car limped on tires, crunching over gravel and slush. He could just make out the inn's crooked sign through the curtain of snow. "Look," Miles said, leaning forward. "I think that's it. That's the place from the map." The car pulled up in front of the inn. An old red-painted clapboard building sat heavy and dark, flanked by crooked trees hunched beneath a foot of snow. Strings of Christmas lights, some broken, some blinking red and green, looped along the porch rail. For a moment, the world outside felt frozen in time. Every sound but the wind snuffed out. Jordan cut the engine, and the three of them just sat there, breath fogging the windows. No other cars, Miles noted, peering out. "We get the whole place." Eliza tucked the map away. "Let's get inside before we freeze to death out here." The inn's front door creaked open before they could even knock. And a thin man with silver hair and a mustache, face-shadowed eyes sharp, waved them in. He wore a brown cardigan over a turtleneck, and he looked them up and down, like someone used to trouble. "Welcome to Maple Hollow," he said, voice gravelly. "Late check-in." "Yeah, A car trouble," Jordan offered, rubbing his hands together. He could feel the blood thawing in his fingers. "Is there a room?" The man nodded, taking a battered guest book from the desk. He flipped it open, revealed a handful of names and check-ins that trailed off at the beginning of December. "You're in luck. Only got a few guests tonight. Room 103's free. It's a corner room, quiet, warm. Keys on the ring." As he handed over the key, a heavy brass number dangling from a green plastic tag. Eliza's eyes lingered on a photograph behind the desk, a black and white shot of the inn from decades ago, snowdrifts taller than the porch, a row of figures in heavy coats standing at the railing. It looked like a ghost story, waiting to be told. "Sign here," the manager said, pushing the register forward. Jordan scribbled their names. Jordan Park, Eliza Rowe, Miles Carter, under the date December 18th, 1997. The pen scratched on the paper, the sound oddly loud in the quiet. "Breakfast at 8, the manager said with a glance at the swirling darkness beyond the windows. "Don't go wandering tonight. These storms have a way of fooling folks." He slid the register back and closed it with a snap. The hallways of the inn were dim-lined with old wallpaper the color of faded pine needles. Portraits hung at crooked angles, faces long dead staring out beneath a layer of dust. The trio's footsteps echoed as they made their way to room 103 at the end of the hall. The room itself was small, but not unwelcoming: twin beds with heavy quilts, a dresser with a warped mirror, a window rimmed with frost. Jordan set down their bags, while Eliza flicked on a lamp, its yellow light making the room feel smaller, but not safer. Miles dropped onto the bed and stretched out arms over his head. "So, "We're stuck here for the night," he said. "Could be worse." Jordan nodded, glancing at his reflection in the warped mirror. For a moment he saw not just himself, but something behind him, a flicker of motion. He turned, but the door was closed and only Eliza was unpacking her coat. Outside, the wind rattled the window panes, snow piling up along the sill. They talked for a while about plans what they'd do when they got to Seattle the next semester at school. Eliza joked about ghost stories and old motels, about places you only see in horror movies. Miles laughed too loudly, and Jordan tried to join in, but a tension threaded through the conversation, growing with every minute the storm howled. As midnight neared, the electricity flickered. Eliza, always the brave one, said she'd get more blankets from the closet at the end of the hall. Miles decided to go with her. Jordan lingered in the room, staring out into the blizzard. Snow slashed sideways across the glass, obscuring the world outside. For a few moments, he felt a pressure like someone watching just beyond the pane. He pressed his palm to the cold glass, exhaled, and watched the fog of his breath vanish. The hall outside was silent. Eliza and Miles' footsteps faded away, swallowed by the creaks and sighs of the old inn. The manager's office door was shut, light off. Back in room 103, Jordan heard a low scraping sound behind the wall, so faint he thought he'd imagined it. He leaned in, ear pressed against the paneling, but there was nothing except the howl of the wind and the beat of his heart. Eliza and Miles returned, arms full of blankets and laughter, though both looked a little paler than before. "The lights in the hall keep flickering," Eliza said, tossing a blanket onto Jordan's bed. "Swear I saw someone at the end, but when we got there, just a window." They settled in, tired and shivering, wrapping up in layers each with their own thoughts. The lamp cast odd shadows on the ceiling, long arms reaching from the corners. Miles fell asleep first, then Eliza. Jordan stared up at the ceiling, eyes tracing cracks in the plaster, trying not to listen to the sounds outside, the wind, the tap of something against the glass, the groan of old timbers. He closed his eyes, but sleep came fitful. Sometime in the dead of night, something woke him. A voice, thin and desperate, carried by the wind. He sat up, heart racing, and saw the door to room 103 was ajar, the hallway beyond a tunnel of darkness. Jordan called out softly at first, then louder. "Eliza, Miles." But they slept on, faces pale in the thin light. He got up, padded to the door, looked out. The hallway was empty, but the storm outside howled like a wounded animal. The light at the far end of the corridor flickered, shadows dancing along the walls. Jordan was about to close the door when he heard a scream, sharp and sudden, somewhere distant, but close enough to freeze his blood. The sound echoed through the bones of the inn, up through the floorboards, into his chest. He slammed the door and locked it, heart pounding. Inside the room, the air felt colder, the shadows thicker. Eliza and Miles woke, eyes wide and terrified. "Did you hear that?" Eliza whispered. Miles nodded, clutching the blanket to his chin. They all listened, holding their breath, but the only answer was the wind. Minutes crawled by. Jordan double-checked the lock. Eliza paced, wringing her hands. Miles muttered that maybe it was just the wind or someone outside. None of them believed it. A sudden bang, sharp and violent, rattled the window. Jordan nearly leaped out of his skin. Eliza shrieked and Miles backed up against the headboard. The lights flickered, then died, plunging the room into darkness. In the pitch black, they clung to each other, listening as footsteps, heavy and slow, moved up the hallway, pausing outside their door. The handle turned just a hair, then stopped. They barely breathed, afraid even to whisper. Somewhere down the hall, something crashed, a glass shattering, or maybe a chair overturned. The footsteps retreated, faded into silence. The wind kept howling, snow pelting the windows with new fury. When dawn finally came, gray and cold, the storm had softened. But Maple Hollow Inn was no more. Fire crews trudged up the frozen drive to find the building collapsed. Timbers charred, icicles melting from scorched gutters. Of the 3 students, not a single trace was ever found. No bodies, no bags, no footprints. The only thing left was a burned brass key, half melted, its number, just legible, 103. For decades after, the police reports would say it was an accident, a fire sparked by the storm, bad wiring, a tragic loss. But in Maple Hollow, when the snow fell thick and the wind picked up, sometimes late at night, locals would claim they heard it, a voice calling for help, a door slamming shut, and 3 names on the wind, lost and never found. The world moved on, and the records gathered dust, the story fading into the silence of a winter night that never truly ended. Avery Quinn never quite figured out when her world had narrowed to 3 small rooms and a calendar with nothing circled. Most days, the only sound in her Vancouver apartment was the rattling of a portable heater and the soft, uncertain shuffle of her mother's slippers down the hallway. The world outside seemed far away, muffled by rain on glass and years of memories gone soft at the edges. Avery had become an expert in silence, her own, her mother's, the kind that creeps in around old grief and settles dust-like on the shoulders. She was 34 and carried herself with the quiet vigilance of a night shift nurse. She wrote for a magazine few people still read, covering cold cases. No one wanted solved missing girls in small towns, old men found in frozen lakes. Stories that were always a little too late. Her inbox was a graveyard of unfinished leads and sorry for your loss form letters. Every morning she made her mother tea, signed the latest prescription log, then tried to write. It rarely worked. Her mother, Marianne, drifted in and out of memory. Face turned always slightly away from the present. Some days she would mistake Avery for a nurse, or heartbreakingly for Eliza, Avery's sister, who'd vanished in the winter of '97, swallowed up by the same storm that had taken Maple Hollow in. Eliza's photo-black hair, quick smile stood framed on the shelf, untouched by dust. That Thursday morning began like all the others. Rain tapped on the window. Avery poured herself burnt coffee, then scrolled through her email on autopilot. Mostly newsletters and junk. She almost missed it. Subject for you. No sender, no address, just the message blinking at the top of her screen. For a second she hesitated, thinking it a virus or spam. But habit honed by years of chasing ghosts won out. She clicked. Room 103 still isn't finished. That was it. No greeting, no name, no threat. Just those words typed in a font so ordinary it felt clinical. Her heart gave a tiny jolt, then stilled. For a long moment, Avery just stared screen blue in the pre-dawn light. She hadn't heard those words in decades. Her fingers shook as she typed a reply. Who is this? But the message bounced back undeliverable. She read it again and again, the old familiar dread rising in her chest. In the background, her mother shuffled into the kitchen, humming an off-key lullaby from Avery's childhood. Room 103. Avery's therapist had warned her about patterns of return, the way trauma called you back to the same closed doors over and over, even when you knew they never opened. Maple Hollow was her closed door. The night Eliza vanished, Avery had been 8 years old home, with the flu listening to the storm. She remembered her father's voice on the phone, cracked and hollow, and the way her mother screamed in the next room. Eliza, 17 and untouchable, had set off for a road trip to Seattle and never returned. For years, Avery had waged a silent war against memory. She gathered every newspaper clipping, every police report, every rumor in the Maple Hollow file. She kept it all, photos, receipts, gas station faxes, in a battered box beneath her bed, hidden even from herself. When she turned 20, she'd driven to the site, found nothing but blackened stones and stumps. The inn erased the land sold to a timber company. The records listed the fire as an accident, a wiring fault, cause undetermined. 3 students had vanished, Eliza among them. No survivors, no bodies, only rumors. The years blurred together. University, a half-finished law degree, stringer work for local papers, a string of ex-boyfriends who all called her intense. Her father left, unable to stay in the house with 2 missing women. Avery stayed. Someone had to keep the memory. She never called it hope. It was just habit-heavy and impossible. But now, after 26 years, someone else remembered. She couldn't shake it. The email. The sense of someone watching the old scar, tearing open the weight of unfinished business. She tried to dismiss it. Unsolicited emails happened. But it was the specificity, the number, the timing that clawed at her mind. Room 103 still isn't finished. Who would send it? And why now? She looked over at her mother pouring milk into a mug with trembling hands. Marianne caught her staring and smiled, her eyes blank as fresh snow. Are you Eliza's friend? She asked, hopeful. Avery felt the old ache, but smiled. No, Mom. I'm just me. She spent the morning lost in old files reading over the autopsy reports again, though there were none, not for bodies never found. She tried to chase new leads, but there were none. She Googled the name of the inn Maple Hollow Inn fire and found the same results as always: a couple of archived articles, 3 short obituaries, and 1 urban legend post about a haunted hotel in British Columbia. The site itself didn't exist anymore. Google Maps showed only a blank patch of forest, no results found. But the email still glowed at the top of her screen. And Avery, for all her caution, had always believed in the gravity of unfinished stories. It started small. A call to the archives in Prince George, then to a retired fire marshal who'd worked the case. Nobody remembered much. The timber company that bought the land had gone bankrupt a decade before. The new owners were impossible to track. The few records that existed were water damaged or accidentally lost when the courthouse flooded in 2004. Someone, it seemed, wanted Maple Hollow Inn forgotten. That made Avery want it more. That afternoon, as the rain hammered the roof and her mother napped, Avery opened the battered box from under her bed. She laid out Eliza's letters, yearbook, a yellowed tourist brochure for the inn. The photo on the front. A cozy winter retreat showed the building just as she remembered: 2 stories wide, porch crooked sign. Room numbers painted in gold leaf on the windows. She found a copy of the guest ledger, the only one the RCMP had ever released, dated December 18, 1997. 3 signatures, 3 names: Jordan Park, Eliza Rowe, Miles Carter. Eliza's neat handwriting. Avery touched the page, felt the chill of memory prickle her arms. Who was Jordan Park? Who was Miles Carter? She'd tracked their families down years before. Neither knew anything more than Avery, just that their children were gone, presumed dead. The pain had scattered them across provinces, their voices hollow with time. She scanned through the Maple Hollow file, letting her mind go quiet, listening for the thing beneath the details, the pattern she'd always missed. On the bottom of the guest ledger page, in blue ballpoint, someone had scrawled, "No checkout." Avery had always thought it a joke, a note from the innkeeper. Now it felt like a warning. She stared at the photo of the inn. The windows of room 103 glinted darkly, reflecting nothing. She remembered the dream she'd had as a child, Eliza waving from the window, her face blurred by frost. That night, Avery sat at her desk, the city lights outside blurring into streams of gold and white. She reread the email, feeling the old engine of obsession cranked to life. A story unfinished. A room waiting. She called her old editor, asked for an advance on travel. Said she had a story brewing, the kind with national legs. The editor, used to Avery's instincts, said yes, if only because the magazine needed something with teeth. Avery packed a single-bag laptop recorder camera, the battered folder of notes. She scribbled a note for her mother's nurse, left a meal in the fridge, kissed Marianne's forehead before she left. "Be safe, sweetheart," her mother murmured, half awake. "Don't stay out in the storm." Outside, the rain had stopped, replaced by a chill that bit through Avery's coat. She walked to the station, boarded a late-night train heading north, the tracks slick with mist. The city shrank behind her, replaced by darkness, then trees, then nothing at all. On the seat beside her, her phone buzzed. Another message, no sender, just text. "Some doors don't close. 103. Avery stared at the screen, heart pounding, the rhythm oddly familiar. It was as if someone was guiding her hand, pulling her down a road she'd sworn she'd never travel again. But she was already moving. Back to Maple Hollow, back to the winter that had never quite ended, back to the room that waited. As the train rattled north, Avery pressed her forehead to the window, watching the trees blur by, and tried to remember her sister's face. She would find answers, or she would not return. Either way, room 103 was not finished. Not yet. The train cut north through endless pines, then dumped Avery into a ghost town, a platform half swallowed by weeds, a single street lamp flickering in the blue chill of dawn. No one waited for her. She shouldered her bag, the wind biting through her sleeves, and began walking west toward the highway. The road wound for miles, banked by snow and silence. Her boots grew heavy with slush. For the first time in years, Avery felt utterly alone and oddly more alive than she'd felt in a decade. She'd done her research on the ride up. The old Maple Hollow Inn site sat at the end of a forestry access road, now gated and posted with signs, no trespassing. Private land, logging vehicles only. But satellite maps told a different story. In the last 6 months, new construction had appeared: a fresh gravel drive, a rectangle of building foundation. Then a new roofline, almost identical to the one she remembered from those yellowed brochures. Avery couldn't get any permit records. All requests were unavailable due to privacy restrictions. She dug through shell companies and contractor lists. Every trail ended in a dead end or an empty LLC registered in Vancouver or Delaware. It all reeked of money and secrecy. Someone wanted this place invisible, and someone wanted it exactly the same. Avery followed the access road until the trees grew thick and the noise of the world fell away. She passed a truck abandoned in the ditch, faded green with a logo she didn't recognize: Aurora Property Management. The windshield was spattered with mud, the tires half sunk. No one inside. A little further, another sign: site under construction, employees only. Her pulse quickened. She kept walking, boots crunching through patches of old ice. Beyond a bend in the road, the land suddenly opened, flattened raw with recent earthwork. In the middle stood a building. Maple Hollow Inn, resurrected, 2 stories, red clapboard porch strung with bare bulbs, exactly as it had looked in every photo she'd seen, down to the crooked weather vane on the roof. For a moment, Avery just stared. The cold bit into her, but she felt sweat on her neck. This wasn't just a rebuild. It was a facsimile, too precise, too loyal to a blueprint that should have been lost. She watched from the tree line. Workers in orange vests and navy jackets moved about with studied efficiency, heads down. They spoke quietly in clusters, radios clipped to their belts, hard hats marked not with a company, but a single icon, a black key. A van idled near the entrance, men hauling in boxes wrapped in plastic sheeting. She spotted a generator humming at the rear of the lot, its exhaust pluming in the cold. Avery didn't move until a white truck rolled up, and 3 men got out, all wearing identical navy coats. The driver opened the trunk and started handing out crates, paper, electronics, a bundle of what looked like old furniture legs, each labeled in black: Sharpie 103, desk 103, mirror 103, lamp. That did it. She snapped a photo on her phone, hand trembling. Every piece right down to the room numbers. She retreated behind a stack of lumber, heart thumping. The worksite was a fortress, but the morning bustle hit a rhythm: workers moving in shifts, drivers making deliveries, foremen barking orders. It was just controlled chaos, the kind that hid gaps. After an hour watching, she spotted her opening. A pair of workers left the back gate open while unloading supplies, their clipboards tossed on the dash. Avery tugged the hood of her jacket up, tucked her chin, and strode forward, adopting the practiced gait of someone who belonged. At the gate, a man glanced up, grunted. "You with Aurora?" She nodded, flashing a confident half smile. "Maintenance. Got a call about a fuse box. Boss said it was urgent." She held up her bag, praying the toolbox would sell the lie. The man squinted, then shrugged. "3rd floor's a mess. Good luck." He waved her in, already forgetting her face. Inside the fence, the air changed. The noises grew muffled: workers' voices, the drone of saws, even the wind, as if the building itself swallowed sound. Avery kept to the edges, weaving around dumpsters and stacks of sheetrock, ducking past trailers labeled temp staff only. She let herself sink into the role, avoiding eye contact, always moving with purpose. The main building loomed impossibly familiar. She passed the front porch, boots clanging on the loose boards. For a second, she hesitated at the threshold. Through the glass, she saw her own reflection, older, drawn, but with Eliza's jawline, her father's eyes. For a split second, she thought she saw someone behind her, a flicker of motion in the shadows gone when she spun. Inside, the smell of new paint and old secrets mingled in the air. Plastic sheeting covered the furniture, but even under wraps, the layout was unmistakable. Lobby desk to the left, parlor to the right, stairs ahead. Someone had gone to impossible lengths to match the original Avery, spotted the same faded wallpaper pattern, the same chipped tile around the fireplace. A battered guest book, identical to the one from 1997, sat open on the counter, though the pages were blank. She drifted through the hallways, memorizing the path. Workers moved past, heads down, intent on their tasks. In the dining room, a man on a stepladder reinstalled an ancient chandelier, crystals clinking as if in protest. No one stopped her. She moved with the confidence of anonymity, certain only of her lie. At the end of the main hall, a side corridor branched off, plaster dust swirling in the light. At the far end, a familiar door, 103, its brass number polished, newly affixed. Someone had scrubbed the paint, refinished the handle, but the scratches near the lock remained faint, almost invisible. But Avery knew them by heart. She pressed her palm against the wood, feeling for a heartbeat. Nothing. Just cold. She glanced around, then tried the knob. Locked. She listened, nothing. No footsteps, no voices. She crouched, checking beneath the door for movement, but the room was silent. She fished in her bag, found a pair of wire snips and an old pass card from another job, then slipped the edge into the jamb. The lock gave with a gentle click. Inside, the air was still heavy with the scent of dust and lemon oil. Light filtered through the curtains, casting faint gold patterns on the floor. The room was perfect, not just close exact. The same twin beds, the floral quilt, the desk under the window, the round mirror with a hairline crack. Even the lamp, its shade yellowed by time, glowed with that familiar warmth. Avery ran her hand across the dresser, fingers trembling. She reached for the old rotary phone beside the bed, lifted the receiver. It was dead as it had always been. A cold shiver ran down her spine. She moved to the window. The view outside was as she remembered, forest blanketed in frost sky, the color of unpolished silver. On the sill, a chipped mug sat, "World's Best Mom," painted in faded letters. Avery touched it, eyes blurring. Eliza had sent her a mug like that for Mother's Day, the last one, before she vanished. On the back of the door, something caught her eye, a small dust-choked sign barely visible, paint flaking from decades of neglect. She wiped it clean with her sleeve. In stenciled letters, "Not for outsiders." She read it twice, her heart knocking against her ribs. The words felt like an accusation, a dare, a curse. She snapped a photo, then looked around the room for clues. On the bed, a plastic-wrapped bundle. "Property of 103. Do not remove." She unwrapped it. Inside, a faded composition notebook with 3 names scrawled inside the cover: Jordan, Eliza, Miles. The rest of the pages were blank. Avery sat on the bed, the mattress sagging in the middle. She closed her eyes, breathing in the memories, rain on the roof. Laughter in the hall, her sister's voice calling her from the doorway. For a moment she let herself be small again, let the grief pull at her ribs. She opened her eyes and caught her reflection in the cracked mirror, alone, unsteady, but unbroken. Suddenly voices echoed down the hall, closer, sharper. Avery snapped to attention, stuffing the notebook into her bag, straightening her jacket. She slipped out, closing the door behind her with barely a click. She heard footsteps, men's voices. "Boss wants the room ready by tomorrow. No one goes in unless they're on the list." The words faded as she pressed herself into an alcove. When they passed, she slipped out the back, heart hammering, mind racing. It was all too real. The room was rebuilt, every detail preserved. For who, for what? Who? As she stepped out into the gray daylight, snow began to fall slow and silent. Behind her, the inn glowed in the dim morning, a lighthouse for the lost, or a warning for those who dared return. Avery Quinn pulled her coat tighter, mind whirring with questions and fear and something else, hope. Maple Hollow Inn was alive again, and whatever waited inside room 103, it was waiting for her. The air in room 103 felt thinner after Avery's intrusion, as if the space itself knew she didn't belong. She sat in the dusty silence, heart thrumming, staring at the old rotary phone on the bedside table. The walls, painted that tired shade of forget-me-not blue, seemed to lean closer with every minute. She could hear workers' voices somewhere outside, the low hum of a generator, but here all sounds were smothered by insulation and memory. She took a breath and began to search. Avery started at the dresser, pulling open drawers and running her hands along their felt-lined insides. The top drawer was empty but for a lone safety pin and a yellowed Maple Hollow Inn notepad the kind left behind in every roadside room in the 90s. She pocketed the pad almost absently and moved on. The bottom drawer resisted at first, swollen from years of neglect, then abruptly giving way. At the back, behind a stack of musty Gideon Bibles, Avery's fingers brushed cold metal. She reached in and pulled out a small VHS player, its surface mottled with fingerprints and dust wires coiled like veins. Taped to the side was a VHS cassette, no label, no date, only a strip of yellowed tape across the top, scored with a jagged indented line, as if someone had started to write and changed their mind. Her breath caught. She hadn't seen a player like this in years, not since her father's den. Not since the Christmas Eliza taped over It's a Wonderful Life, with a bootleg copy of Titanic. But this one felt impossibly old, out of place, too deliberate to be a simple relic. She found the cord scanned the wall there, behind the nightstand, a battered outlet. Avery plugged the machine in. The device whirred to life, power light blinking. She tried the TV, first flat screen, modern, a clear replacement, but the VHS player needed coaxial input. She followed the wires behind the dresser, her hands brushing dust and grit, and found the adapter already there. Someone had set this up recently. Avery sat cross-legged on the floor and slid the tape into the slot. It chewed for a moment, then clicked. Static filled the screen, white noise, snowy ghosts, and then abruptly a picture. The image was grainy, overexposed at the edges, but unmistakable, a boy, maybe 19, with tousled dark hair and anxious eyes. Jordan Park. He sat on the edge of a twin bed, the same bed Avery now sat before. The camera shook as if held by uncertain hands. Jordan looked up straight into the lens. His face was streaked with worry, but he tried to smile. "Is it recording?" he said, voice muffled. The camera tilted, steadied. "Yeah, I think so," another voice replied, lighter. Eliza's voice, unmistakable, a note of hope and fear blended together. Jordan's shifted hands clenched in his lap. "We're at Maple Hollow, December 18th, he said. "We're stuck here because of the storm, but we're okay. Eliza's with me and Miles is somewhere." He glanced off screen. "If anyone finds this," the picture flickered lines running up the screen. Avery's stomach dropped. She gripped the remote thumb, frozen over the pause button. The camera wobbled. Now the angle changed. Someone else was holding it. Eliza's face appeared smiling, then fading into seriousness as she glanced over her shoulder. "Do you ever feel like we're being watched?" she asked. "Even when there's no one here?" Jordan snorted a little too quickly. "It's just the storm. Or ghosts." Another flicker. The camera zoomed out, unsteady. For a moment, the screen filled with nothing but static. Avery leaned forward, trying to make out shapes in the gray. Then suddenly the picture cleared, and what she saw made her breath stop. Jordan sat on the bed again, staring at the camera. Only this time, someone stood behind him. It was a woman. Pale hair pulled back, wearing a blue jacket, Avery's jacket. Avery's face. But it couldn't be. She watched, transfixed, as her own reflection, older, sharper, unmistakably herself, stood in the frame just behind Jordan's shoulder. Jordan's eyes darted to the side, meeting hers in the mirror. He looked terrified. The camera holder, Eliza's hands, perhaps didn't react. No one else seemed to notice Avery's figure. But she watched, paralyzed, as she lifted a hand, almost reaching out. And then the picture flickered again. The room on the tape dissolved into chaos. Eliza screaming, Miles yelling, a blur of movement. Static roared in Avery's ears. The screen went black. Avery sat there, heart-hammering, hands numb with shock. The tape had jammed in the player, whirring and chewing as if desperate to keep going, to keep showing. She ejected it, stared at the black cassette in her palm. Impossible. This wasn't some hallucination, not a nightmare. She had seen herself in a recording made 26 years ago, in a room she'd never entered until today. Her mind raced with wild explanations, editing tricks, deepfakes, hypnosis, trauma, hallucinations. But none fit. It was her. Down to the cut of her jaw, the scar on her right cheek, the way she tugged at the sleeve of her jacket. She remembered doing that just an hour ago, standing in the hallway, before sneaking inside. She stood on trembling legs, needing air, needing movement. She flicked on the lamp beside the bed. The bulb flashed a weak halo, then died with a brittle pop. Darkness fell like a shutter. Avery fumbled for her phone, turned on the flashlight, the beam slicing a pale circle in the gloom. She swept the room, searching for any sign of explanation, a trick of mirrors, a hidden camera, something. But everything was as it had been. Only the silence grew pressing in from every wall. She caught sight of herself in the mirror over the desk, a pale shape, wild-eyed breath fogging the glass. But something was wrong. The reflection didn't quite match her movements. As she lifted her phone, the mirrored image lagged, stuttering, then blinking out of sync. Avery stepped closer, trying to see beyond the veil of dust. Suddenly, behind her, the reflection twisted. In the space between her shoulders, a dark shape coalesced, a figure taller than Avery, face smudged into a gray blur, features sliding like oil on water. It stood impossibly still, as if waiting for her to see it. Avery spun around, heart pounding in her throat, but the room behind her was empty. The shadow in the mirror remained. It leaned forward, its head nearly touching hers. The air grew colder, breath freezing in Avery's lungs. "Who are you?" she whispered, eyes locked on the glass. The shadow didn't answer, but the mirror began to fog words, scrawling backward from within. "Not for outsiders." The same warning as the sign, the same dare, the same curse. Avery staggered back, hitting her hip on the desk. The phone's light jittered in her hand, bouncing off the walls. The darkness thickened the mirror, now swirling with shapes and faces too fast to focus, but unmistakable. Jordan, Eliza Miles, all staring out, all pleading, all silent. The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in. The tape player clicked and whirred, then spit the cassette out onto the floor. Avery stared at it, heart battering her ribs, then grabbed the tape and shoved it into her bag. Her hands shook so badly she could barely zip it closed. Voices drifted in from the hallway, footsteps, too many to count. Avery killed her phone's light and pressed herself into the shadow beside the window, heart in her throat. The footsteps paused outside the door. Someone jiggled the handle once, twice, then moved on. She didn't breathe until the sounds faded down the hall. Avery pressed her back against the wall, sliding down to sit on the cold, scuffed floor. She closed her eyes, counting her heartbeats. Every sound her own breath. The wind outside, the distant hum of the generator, felt amplified, ominous. She tried to ground herself, reminding herself that she was here, that this was real, that she had come to find answers, not more ghosts. But the room had other plans. She opened her eyes, scanning for an exit, for anything that might explain what she'd just seen. The VHS tape, still warm from the machine, pulsed in her palm, a secret with teeth biting into her certainty. For the first time, Avery wondered if she'd come here not to find the past, but to become part of it. In the mirror, the shadow lingered silent and watchful. As Avery stood and fumbled for the door, a whisper threaded through the darkness, too faint to hear, but close enough to chill her blood. The storm outside picked up wind, rattling the window snow, swirling in the growing dusk. Room 103, alive again. The past refusing to stay dead. Avery pressed her forehead to the cool glass, her own face blurred by condensation and fear. Behind her, the shadow smiled, and the tape back in her bag kept time with her racing heart. Avery barely slept that night. She'd left room 103 only after the footsteps faded and the quiet returned, slipping out as if nothing had happened, as if her heart wasn't a raw humming wire. She made her way to a maintenance closet she'd seen earlier, using a stolen keycard to wedge herself inside, crouched behind paint cans and mop handles. There she scrolled through the photos she'd snapped on her phone, frame by frame, dusty sign, the mirror, the unlabeled tape. Her hands shook. She texted her own number, just to feel a tether to something real, but the signal barely flickered. The world outside the inn felt impossibly distant. Before dawn, she made her way back into the hallway, mindset on one impossible question. How could she be in that old recording? How could the past have reached forward and caught her in its jaws? She needed proof, something tangible, something now. If she was hallucinating, she would know. If she was losing her mind, it would leave traces. The inn was quiet, the construction crews not yet on site, save for a solitary guard, half asleep behind the lobby desk. Avery drifted past him, invisible in her faded jacket and work boots. She made her way back toward room 103, then ducked into the supply closet across the hall. Through the cracked door, she had a clear line of sight right at the threshold. If anyone entered or left, she'd see. Her watch read 6:13 a.m. She waited. 20 minutes, 30. Nothing but silence, the faint ticking of the old wall clock. The room opposite stayed sealed, the door undisturbed. Avery's breath fogged in the chilly air, and for a moment she tried to convince herself it was all a trick of the mind, the shock of memory and grief colliding in the quiet. But the weight in her chest said otherwise. Finally, she crept out and approached the door again. She checked the handle locked just as she'd left it. In the corridor, she spotted a small dome camera mounted above the exit sign, red LED blinking. She glanced at it, heart thumping. There, if there was any answer, it would be here. Avery followed the corridor toward the operations office, a windowless room marked staff only. She waited until a worker, a young man in a reflective vest preoccupied with a clipboard, pushed through the door and left it propped. Avery slipped inside, pressing herself flat against the shelves until he was gone. Rows of monitors lined the wall, cycling through grainy black and white footage, lobby, parking lot, staff kitchen, and the hallway outside room 103. She scrolled back the footage, hands, sweating eyes stinging from lack of sleep. The timestamp flicked backwards in blocky digits, 5:40, 5:15, 4:58. There it was. Room 103, her own outline moving through the frame, pausing at the door. She fast-forwarded. The corridor emptied. For nearly an hour, no one entered or left. No one followed. She checked again, running the feed back and forth, watching herself disappear behind the door. Then emerge later, face-pale hair mussed, clutching her bag. She should have been satisfied. But her mind whirred back to the tape, the old recording from 1997. Jordan sitting on the bed, her own figure, a version of herself, unmistakable, standing behind him, looking into the camera with haunted, knowing eyes. She'd watched that tape 4 times now, always the same. She was there. The past had recorded her. But the present proved she hadn't gone in. At least not yet. A cold ache twisted in her gut. As she slipped back into the hallway, the floor felt soft beneath her boots, as if the world were folding in on itself. She passed a glass case mounted on the wall inside a guest register, yellowed and torn. She caught her own reflection and froze. For a split second, she swore she saw her sister standing behind her eyes, shadowed mouth open as if to call her name. Avery spun. No one there. Just the empty corridor stretching into early morning haze. It got worse at night. She tried to sleep, lying curled on the narrow bed in a staff room she'd commandeered. But every time her eyes closed, she found herself inside a different dream. Jordan's face, pale and terrified, swam before her. She saw him running down the same hallway, his breath clouding in the cold. There was pounding at the door, a figure in the darkness. Someone was whispering words Avery couldn't understand. Then, "You are the replacement." The voice, low, hissing, almost mechanical, slithered through her mind. "You are the replacement. You are the replacement." She jolted awake, heart in her throat, sweat chilling her skin. The room was silent, empty. But her clock, old battery-powered, ticked on the shelf, now read 3:11 a.m. She'd gone to bed at 3:17. She blinked, confused, checking her phone, 3:11. The clock had gone backward. She sat up, shaking, telling herself she'd said it wrong, that time had slipped, that dreams had bled into reality. But the sense of wrongness grew sticky and oppressive. When she forced herself back to sleep, the dreams returned. She saw Jordan again, this time dragged into a windowless room by faceless figures in navy jackets. The walls pulsed with shadows, and the voice came again. "Ngui la ke the te? You are the substitute." Jordan's mouth opened in a scream, but Avery couldn't hear the sound, only a distant, echoing sob. She woke panting again. This time 2:56 a.m. The clock had lost even more time. She wandered the halls at night, unable to rest, hoping movement would shake the shadows loose. The inn seemed to change as she walked. Doors appeared and vanished, the numbers flickering in the darkness. Sometimes she passed workers, quiet, watchful types in black jackets, who glanced at her with the wary familiarity of people recognizing an old friend or a returning ghost. One nodded at her as if he'd known her for years. Another older man smiled thinly and said, "You're here early this time." Avery froze, the words sticking in her chest. "What do you mean?" she whispered. But he was already gone, turning a corner and disappearing down the back stairwell. Later at breakfast, she sat in the half-finished dining room with a mug of bad coffee watching the other workers. Conversations hushed when she entered. Some faces lit with recognition, some turned away as if uncomfortable. She caught a young woman barely out of high school, staring at her, openly, mouth curled in a strange, almost apologetic smile. Avery forced herself to approach. "Have we met before?" she asked, voice thin. The girl shook her head. "No. She trailed off. "You remind me of someone. Maybe you stayed here before." Avery laughed, the sound hollow. "Not since it burned down." The girl's eyes widened, then flicked away, suddenly very interested in her cereal. The sense of being watched only intensified. Every reflective surface, a window, a puddle on the tile, the polished steel of a kitchen appliance, caught her image and warped it. Sometimes in the background, she saw other faces. Eliza, Jordan, Miles. Her own face, younger, older, flickering through the glass. She tried to leave. More than once, Avery found herself at the front entrance, hand on the door. But when she pushed, the handle stuck. The world outside the window blurred as if seen through water, the snow falling upward instead of down. She walked back to her room, closed the door, and watched the minute hand on the wall clock spin backward 2-3-5 minutes, then jerk forward again. That night, the dreams worsened. She watched Jordan again, now in a circle of lamplight, chained to a wooden chair. The same voice whispered, "You are the next." Every time someone must take their place. She woke with a gasp, the sense of doom tightening like a noose. This time her clock read 12:47 a.m. The ticking was impossibly loud. On her pillow, she found a slip of paper, a single sentence scrawled in neat block letters, "You are the substitute." Avery sat up in the darkness, her mind fraying at the edges. She was inside the loop now, part of the same ritual, the same pattern. As the storm raged outside, the inn seemed to lean closer, the walls hungry for memory, for sacrifice. And the faces of those who watched her, real, reflected, or remembered, blurred into one unbroken, endless stare. Avery had no intention of going home, not so soon, not after what the inn had shown her. But the clock was running backward, and her nerves were beginning to ravel. The last nightmare left her too raw. The whisper, "You are the substitute," repeating in her skull long after sunrise. It was as if the inn had laid a hand on her shoulder, and now everything she touched felt charged with the electricity of other people's memories. But her mother had called that morning. Or rather, the care worker from Maple Pines, the memory care facility on the far edge of town, had called your mother's asking for you. She's lucid, at least for now. Avery almost didn't go. She was chasing ghosts, and a living one would be harder to face. But her legs brought her there anyway, through slush and wind, through the gray breath of Canadian winter, until she was standing in front of the big glass doors, heart banging. Her mother sat in the window, sunlight painting the grooves of her face. She looked frail today, small, but her eyes were clear in that rare, fleeting way. Avery walked in, and her mother, startled, blinking up at her hands, fluttering as if searching for a lost object. "Eliza," she whispered. Avery stopped, throat closing. "No, Mom. It's me. It's Avery." Her mother stared, confusion and hope swimming in her gaze. And for a moment, Avery wanted to let her believe. It wanted to sit and be Eliza, if that would buy her mother a few moments of peace. But the next breath, her mother's eyes sharpened, and she shook her head, the present crashing back in. "No, not Eliza." "She's her mother," trailed off, eyes drifting to the window. Avery sat beside her, holding her hands, thin-veined, trembling. The heat between them felt like a memory. They sat for a long while in silence, the world outside moving on. Then, as if dredging the words from a dark pool, her mother spoke. "You know she never told us where she was going." "Not really. Your father said she was just going with friends, Jordan and Miles. I saw her pack. I saw the fear on her face, but she left anyway." Avery squeezed her mother's hand. "Mom, what do you remember about that winter 1997? Her mother's face crumpled for a second, lips pursed, fighting for details. "Snow. Always snow. The old van wouldn't start. Eliza came back in twice, said she forgot her camera, then her scarf. Her breath quickened, eyes darting. She hugged you goodbye. You were so small then. You tried to follow her to the door. Avery's pulse hammered. She had no memory of this. She had always believed she'd been left behind too young for a trip that ended in the abyss. She had always pictured Eliza walking away, never looking back. She didn't want to go. Her mother continued, voice thin as tissue. But she did. Jordan was waiting. They promised to be careful. She left a note for you tucked in your coat. Did you ever find it? Avery shook her head. Her mother looked away, blinking back tears. They erased her, Avery. I know they did. I saw the news. I called the police. But when I asked, they said there was no record. Just the boys. Just Jordan and Miles. She closed her eyes, letting a tear fall. Avery felt her own chest constrict. Did Dad know? Her mother flinched. He said to let it be. He said some things can't be fixed. But I kept the photo. She reached for her purse, a battered leather bag on the table, and rifled through the pockets, hands shaking until she drew out an old soft-edged photograph. Here, she said, pressing it into Avery's palm. Avery stared at the faded colors, the torn corner. It was a family picture. A Christmas long ago, her father in his work jacket, her mother, younger, vibrant with an arm around Eliza, bright-eyed, laughing, a scarf looped around her neck. Jordan stood beside her, already half-grown hand on Eliza's shoulder. Miles in the back grinning at someone out of frame. But it was the background that stole Avery's breath. Reflected in the living room mirror behind the family, almost lost in the haze, stood another figure. Not a trick of light. Not some shadow or stranger. It was Avery herself. But older, her own face, as she looked now, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, watching. Like a ghost haunting her own childhood. She flipped the photo over. On the back, her mother had written in looping script, Christmas, 1996. All together. Then in a different hand, her father's sharp and heavy, forget the mirror. Throw this away. Avery closed her eyes, trying to steady herself. Every hair on her arm stood upright. She remembered nothing of that moment, nothing of being there. Nothing of standing behind her own family, staring out with the same fear she carried now. Her mother reached out, fingers brushing Avery's cheek. She tried to come home, you know, after the storm. She called, just once. The line was full of static, but I heard her say, "Don't look for me." Her voice cracked. I looked anyway. The world tilted on its axis. Avery pressed the photograph to her chest. Mom, why did no one believe you? Her mother's eyes dimmed again, slipping back into a safer, quieter place. People believe what they're told to believe. But I remember Eliza. You should remember her too. Avery stood pacing, trying to make sense of the avalanche in her head. She pulled out her phone, scanned the photo, zooming in on the mirror, the reflection, her own face present in a past she had no way to enter. It made no sense. Unless she was part of the pattern all along. Unless somehow she'd been chosen for this. Unless she had always been the substitute. She reached into her pocket for the slip of paper she'd found on her pillow at the inn. You are the substitute? Her hands shook. Back at the inn, she pored through the old guest registries, the ones she'd bribed a site foreman to let her see. Page after page, names blotted out, faded, erased. In every record of that winter, only Jordan and Miles were listed. Eliza's name was missing. Her own name was absent too. But every so often, a line would run down the page, ink bleeding 103. Sub. No date, no signature. The air in the office thickened, buzzing with the static of fluorescent bulbs. Avery felt the world contract, as if the building itself were breathing, waiting. She pressed her forehead to the glass, eyes closed, trying to conjure a memory of Eliza, her laugh, the warmth of her arms, her scent like apples and soap. All she got was a flicker, a sensation like a whisper caught in a blizzard. Her phone buzzed an anonymous message, no number. Ask your mother about the second goodbye. She raced back to Maple Pines, pushing through the evening meal staff, giving her wary glances. She found her mother staring out the window at the snow. Mom, do you remember a second goodbye? Did Eliza ever come back? Her mother closed her eyes. She did. But not as herself. Avery's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Her mother's voice was barely a whisper. "She knocked on the window late at night. I saw her in the glass. She looked so much older, so tired. She said, 'Don't look for me, Mom. Don't let Avery look for me either. If you do, she'll never leave.'" Her mother reached for Avery's hand. "Promise me you won't go back." Avery's heart pounded a thunderclap in her chest. She wanted to promise, but she couldn't. She never could. In the photo, her own reflection looked back at her, a silent witness, a substitute called by the memory of a sister who had tried to save her. Snow began to fall outside the window thick and fast, blanketing the world in white. Avery sat in the hush of her mother's room, clutching the photo. And for a moment she wasn't sure which side of the glass she was on. Avery's footsteps echoed in the hollow corridor beneath Maple Hollow Inn, her hands trembling as she pressed the old guest photo to her chest. The shock of her own reflection haunting the past clung to her mind like fog. She was running out of time, and the line between who and when blurred with every step. There was something in the silence now, a logic, a purpose, as if the place itself was waiting for her to ask the right question. She told herself it was just adrenaline, just paranoia. But the hallway lights flickered, and in every mirrored surface she glimpsed her own outline, sometimes older, sometimes not quite her at all. For the first time, she allowed herself to truly watch the people moving through the skeleton of the inn. The construction crew didn't belong. She realized it with a jolt, their faces too blank, too practiced. Their movements too synchronized, like actors who'd rehearsed the role of being ordinary. She watched a man sweep the same patch of floor 3 times, glancing at her, not with suspicion, but with a flicker of knowing, a flash of recognition that chilled her to the marrow. She ducked into a service stairwell, heart hammering, and found the basement door propped open with a battered toolbox. The air down there was cold electric. The walls were lined with crates stamped in stenciled ink, MH Archives, Arch 103, do not remove. She pulled her jacket tighter and slipped behind a stack, pressing herself flat as voices echoed from deeper in the dark. "She's here early this cycle," said a man's voice, low, precise, no hint of accent. "Not supposed to access 103 until the relay stabilizes." A woman replied, bored and bitter. "Doesn't matter. The system will reset her, always does. It's just a question of how long she remembers." Avery stilled, every muscle coiled. They weren't talking about her, but they were. She tried to hold her breath as footsteps faded past the shadows shifting. When she was certain the way was clear, she pressed on deeper into the archive until she found an unlocked door marked Admin Observation. Inside, rows of old CRT monitors flickered. Some showed the empty halls above. Others played static-laced feeds of Room 103 through the decades, shag carpeting, floral bedspreads, 1,000 tiny changes, marking the flow of time, but always the same sense of waiting. In one feed, she saw a teenage girl curled on the bed, Eliza, unmistakable. The timestamp flickered, Dec 14, 1997. But on the next monitor, Eliza was gone. The same room, the same angle. Now a man Jordan sat on the edge of the bed staring at the door. Behind him, a figure blurred by static, Avery or someone wearing her face. A logbook lay open on the desk. She paged through it, fingers shaking. Every entry was written in precise, cramped script, line after line of Subject 103. Status replacement process initiated. Result memory loop established. The next page, error memory contamination detected. Initiate containment protocol. Asset in transition. Wait for next cycle. The air grew thick. Avery's thoughts spun. This wasn't a restoration project, wasn't a construction site. It was a containment facility, something meant not to preserve the past, but to trap it, to keep it from infecting the present. The people here weren't workers. They were caretakers. Wardens. Her eyes found a chart on the wall, crisscrossed with red yarn and pins. Every incident, every disappearance in the area for the last 50 years. At the center, circled in black, Room 103. Epicenter, temporal disruption. Dozens of names, some crossed out, some repeated, some with the word substitute scribbled beside them. Eliza, Jordan, Miles. Others she didn't recognize, and written in a looping hand, A. Quinn. The question mark stabbed through her. A memory snapped into place. Something Eliza had once whispered, a childhood game: if you get lost, stay put. If you see your own face, run. At the time it was just a joke. Now it pressed like a warning. A drawer below the monitors slid open. VHS tapes meticulously labeled Containment Jordan 97, Eliza 97, Miles 97, Test Subject A, Test Subject R. One slot was empty. Her name was printed on a label beside it, Avery Quinn, pending. Avery's breath shortened, the room seeming to tilt. She flipped on a monitor security feeds from the present day, time-stamped in real time. She watched herself moving through the halls, watched her reflection flicker in the glass. But sometimes for a split second, the reflection wasn't synchronized, a fraction of a second behind, or looking in the wrong direction. Sometimes it wasn't her at all. Footsteps. Avery spun ready to flee, but an older man entered. He looked tired, coat worn at the elbows, eyes wise and sad. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "I need answers." Avery choked. "What is this place?" He sighed, sitting on the edge of a battered desk. "Most people don't remember. If you do, it means you're getting close to the core. That's not good for you or for anyone else." He looked at her, deep into her, as if measuring the weight of every memory she carried. "Room 103 is a failsafe," he said, his voice softer than a secret. "Whenever someone gets too close to a time event, an anomaly, a paradox, this place, it catches them, puts them back in the loop. For most, it's a mercy. For a few, it's a prison. We record what we can, try to patch the gaps. If we didn't, the whole line would unravel." Avery struggled for air. "So Eliza, Jordan, Miles, they're not dead." He hesitated. "Not in the way you think. Their memories are caught. If you looked in the right corner, you'd see them. Sometimes the system creates copies, echoes, so the world keeps turning. But the real ones, the originals, they're in the loop. Room 103 holds the overflow. Anyone who comes searching risks becoming a substitute. That's the only way the pattern stays stable." Tears stung Avery's eyes. "You make people disappear. You erase them. We contain them. The alternative is worse. You saw the tape, didn't you? You saw yourself in it." He studied her, sympathy flickering in his eyes. "The more you look, the more the system notices you. The more you belong to the story." The monitor flickered again. Avery, present day, standing in the archive, but behind her, in the glass, her own face pale and expressionless, staring right back. "Some call it a curse," the man said. "Some call it balance. The truth is, we keep time from tearing itself apart. But it costs us, costs people like you." He stood, pulling a folder from a battered file cabinet. He held it out to her. "Inside, you'll find every error, every substitution the system couldn't resolve. Read it if you dare. But when you're done, you have to decide, run or stay. Because if you stay, room 103 will take what it needs." He left her there, the door creaking shut behind him. Avery sat on the floor, folder trembling in her hands. She opened it, scanning lists of names, photos clipped to pages, all with the same haunted eyes. Some were stamped removed, others substitute. Her own photo was among them, dated with today's date. She pressed her head to her knees, the truth crashing over her. This place was not an accident. It was designed to keep the timeline clean by locking away memories that didn't fit. The cost: every missing person, every echo, every lost loved one sacrificed for an order no one outside could ever see. Room 103 was the knot in the thread of time. And Avery, like Eliza, like Jordan, was now a strand tangled in its web, one heartbeat away from being unraveled, replaced and remembered only as a glitch in the memory of the world. Avery Quinn awoke in utter darkness, her breath catching in her throat, as if she'd been plunged into the middle of a cold river. The world around her felt thick, viscous, the air pressing against her chest. For a moment, she didn't know if her eyes were open or closed, if the blackness was in the room or inside her own mind. Then she heard it, a distant voice calling her name, not Avery, but something older. something that stretched her identity like taffy between two worlds. Her heart pounded as the shadows began to take shape, reforming into the familiar outline of a door. The old battered door of room 103, paint peeling in long vertical strips, its number hanging crookedly on a single bent nail. Snow battered the glass behind her, the window rattling with every gust. She stood barefoot in the hallway, ice-cold underfoot, holding a brass key in her hand, an old key heavy and warm, its teeth sharp against her palm. Avery tried to call out, but her voice caught in her throat, strangled. She looked down at her hands. They were trembling, pale, and thin. But not quite hers. There was something unfamiliar in the lines, in the way her fingers curled, as if memory itself was wearing her body like a costume. The door creaked open by itself. Inside, yellow lamplight flickered over faded wallpaper, the pattern swirling in a slow, impossible spiral. Jordan sat on the edge of the bed, his eyes glassy with fear and confusion. He looked at her, not past her, not through her, but right at her, and a shiver ran through her spine. "Avery," he whispered, but his mouth didn't move. She stepped forward, drawn by some force she could neither resist nor understand. The key in her hand seemed to grow heavier, its metal biting into her skin. She knelt in front of him, her movements slow, dreamlike, and pressed the key into his palm. "You have to take it?" She heard herself say the words, echoing strangely in the stale air. "If you don't, you'll never leave. If you do, someone else takes your place." Jordan stared at her, the confusion on his face blooming into terror. "But I don't understand. I can't leave the door. Not yet," she said, her own voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. "Not unless someone stays. That's how it works." He looked down at the key, then back at her. For a moment his eyes flicked to the mirror across the room, and Avery followed his gaze. In the glass, she saw not her own reflection, but a dozen versions of herself, cycling endlessly child, woman, stranger, each one handing the key to Jordan over and over in an unbroken loop. The dream twisted, fracturing, and suddenly she was standing behind the bed watching as Jordan struggled now, handcuffed to the radiator. She reached out to comfort him, but her hand passed straight through his shoulder. He didn't see her, or maybe he saw too much. The cuffs bit into his wrist, right where the skin met bone, leaving a deep purple bruise. Avery screamed, but no sound escaped her lips. The world blurred, the room spinning as the lamplight flickered out. She bolted upright in her bed, sweat pooling in the hollow of her neck, the world still half shadow, half solid. The window rattled. Her phone buzzed in the dark. She reached for it with shaking hands, but before she could touch it, she felt the ache on her wrist, a dull, throbbing pain. She turned her arm in the glow of the streetlight outside, and saw stark against her skin a fresh bruise in the shape of a cuff, right where she had seen it in the dream, right where Jordan had been shackled in the VHS tape. Her mind spun. She pressed her thumb into the bruise, willing it to fade, but it only throbbed more insistently, as if demanding she remember. She stumbled to the bathroom, flipping on the harsh fluorescent light. Her reflection blinked back at her eyes, hollow cheeks pale. She turned her wrist this way and that, tracing the outline of the bruise, her thoughts fracturing under the weight of the impossible. Had she done this to herself in her sleep? Or was it something more? The bruises, the dreams, the tape, they were all the same pattern, repeating each cycle, growing clearer, sharper, more real. She remembered the words from the folder in the archive, replacement process initiated. Memory loop established. She gripped the sink until her knuckles whitened her breath, fogging the mirror. Who am I, she thought. Who am I really? Am I Avery Quinn or just another echo? Another substitute trapped in a loop that didn't belong to me. She reached for her phone, desperate for a lifeline. But the notifications were all wrong. Missed calls from names she didn't recognize: Jordan F. Miles, R. Eliza Q. Her own initials stitched onto someone else's life. She scrolled through her photos, but the faces blurred, shifting as she watched. In one, she was smiling with Jordan. In another, Eliza was hugging her tight, but Avery looked older, almost like her mother. Her chest tightened. Had she always been the one searching? Or had she at some point become the one who needed to be found? She staggered back to her bed, heart racing, and stared at the ceiling. The cracks there seemed to form a pattern, circles within circles, lines looping back on themselves. She saw the shape of the key, the curve of the number 3, the spiral of a fingerprint, all repeating. If you see your own face, run. She closed her eyes, trying to recall the exact moment she began to feel wrong inside her own skin. Was it when she saw her face in the old family photo? Or when she first dreamed of room 103? Or had it started long before with Eliza's disappearance, with the moment her own name had been left off every official record? Her phone vibrated again. A new message, no sender. You are not Avery Quinn. Not yet. She stared at the words, blood pounding in her ears. Tears pricked her eyes, but she swallowed them down. She needed to know, had to know, if she was just another memory looping through room 103, another piece on the board, or if there was still a way out. She looked at her wrist again, the bruise already darkening, and made a silent promise: I will not become a substitute. I will not let this place have me. But somewhere deep inside, a part of her knew it might already be too late. Avery gripped the brass door handle, her palms slick with sweat, her breath coming in shallow, frightened bursts. She was done with ghosts, done with riddles, done with the room that ate people's names. All she wanted, no, all she needed was to leave. She steeled herself, stepped out into the corridor, and was swallowed by a blizzard of silence so thick it seemed to muffle even her heartbeat. The old hallway was cold and yellow lit, the wallpaper peeling in faded spirals, the floor creaking with every desperate step. She headed for the main exit, past the supply closet, down the stairs, past a half-open door marked laundry. But when she pushed through the heavy fire door at the end of the hall, she found herself stepping back onto the same corridor she'd just left. Room 103 waited for her, the number gleaming dully, as if it had never been touched by smoke or time. Avery froze a sick lurch in her gut. She turned around, thinking she must have taken a wrong turn in her panic. But the layout was impossible. No matter which direction she walked, she ended up in the same place. The hallway looped on itself like a track on a broken record, always bending her back to that terrible door. She tried again this time, counting her steps, tracing her hand along the chipped baseboard, marking a line with her fingernail in the faded wallpaper. She passed a faded landscape painting a snowbound field, crows wheeling overhead once, twice, 3 times. Each time the painting was a little different, the sky darker, the snow deeper, a shadow in the field growing longer, closer to the frame. She muttered to herself, the panic sharpening. It's just a trick. It's just the architecture. There must be a hidden passage, a false wall. She pressed her ear against the doors she passed, listening for voices, for the scrape of footsteps, for any sign of life. But all she heard was the same slow, rhythmic ticking. The old grandfather clock outside room 103, hands circling endlessly, the chime never striking. She tried opening every door, but each led to a closet filled with dust. A utility room with a single flickering bulb, or impossibly the bathroom she'd just left. Her world was shrinking, her options narrowing to a single line, a corridor that led only to room 103 and nowhere else. The building itself seemed to press in on her, the air thick with the weight of unshed memories, as if every wall was hungry for her name. Her panic grew teeth. She broke into a run, shoes pounding on warped floorboards, shoving open door after door, only to find herself staring back at the familiar corridor, always a little darker, always a little more impossible. She skidded to a halt outside the door to room 103, hands shaking. She closed her eyes, fighting the urge to scream. Think, Avery, think. This isn't real. This can't be real. But the bruise on her wrist ached like a brand proof that what was happening was more than nightmare logic. She turned, meaning to try the stairwell, when she caught sight of movement in the tarnished hallway mirror, the antique one hanging crooked above a battered radiator. Her own reflection looked back at her, hair, wild eyes wide. But behind her, in the depth of the mirror, another figure flickered into view. Jordan. He stood there, not quite solid, his outline blurred by the dirty glass. He looked desperate, lips moving in a silent plea. Avery staggered back, heart pounding, watching as Jordan lifted his hand, pressed it to the inside of the mirror, leaving a foggy, trembling handprint on the glass. His eyes locked with hers, fierce and urgent, and though she could not hear his voice, she saw the word form on his lips over and over. Remember. A chill swept through her, and suddenly the corridor seemed to tilt, the walls flexing around her like a heartbeat. She stumbled forward, pressing her own palm to the mirror, feeling only the cool glass, but then a jolt. The static buzzed in her ears, and the world warped around her. A sudden sound snapped her out of the trance, a mechanical click followed by a low whir. She looked down, saw an old cassette tape recorder lying on the hallway floor, its spools turning the tape hissing softly. She bent to pick it up, hands trembling, and pressed play. A voice, distorted and looping, filled the air. At first it was only static and breath. Then slowly, unmistakably, a phrase emerged, echoing off the peeling walls. "If you can't remember who you are, you'll stay forever." The words played again and again, each repetition more warped, more urgent, as if the machine itself was pleading with her. Avery's mind reeled. She pressed the recorder to her ear, trying to make out any other voice, any other clue. But it was always the same warning over and over, a mantra in the key of dread. She turned back to the mirror, desperate, pleading with the specter inside. "Jordan, what do I do? How do I get out?" In the mirror, Jordan pressed his hand to the glass again, and for a brief electric moment, Avery heard his voice not through the tape but inside her own head, a whisper cut free of time. "Remember your name. Remember her name, or it starts again." The lights flickered, then died, plunging the corridor into deep shadow. The cold bit into her bones, the darkness swallowing the edges of her vision. She closed her eyes, fighting to recall her mother's face. Eliza's laughter, the sound of her own name spoken with love and anger and hope. If she let go, if she forgot, she would be lost, just another echo wandering these impossible halls. The recorder clicked off. Silence flooded in, thick and final. She staggered back to the door of room 103. With a hand shaking so hard she could barely grip the handle, she whispered, "I am Avery Quinn. I am Avery. I am." But the echo in the corridor did not sound like her voice. She looked into the mirror. Jordan was gone. In his place, a shadow waited faceless, its hand pressed to the glass. "If you can't remember who you are, you'll stay forever." Avery collapsed to her knees, the words ringing in her skull. The corridor was endless, the door always waiting. She clung to her name, to her memories, knowing they were all that stood between her and the oblivion that had claimed everyone before her. And somewhere deep inside the walls, she heard the other echoes, stirring each one, a story that ended with forgetting, each one waiting to see if she would be the first to escape. Avery lurched through the shadow-thick hallway, her hands trembling, her body battered by the ache of confusion and fatigue. Every door looked the same. Every light flickered with that sickly yellow glow, and the wallpaper's curls felt as though they were trying to memorize her instead of the other way around. Her own name echoed hollow in her skull, fragile and slipping, and she bit her lip to ground herself. Avery Quinn, Avery Quinn, Avery. But the further she moved, the less sure she became. The bruises on her wrist were blackening. She could still hear Jordan's warning echoing in her bones. "Remember who you are, or you'll stay forever." She rounded a corner, desperate for a new path, and nearly collided with herself. The shock hit her like a splash of ice water. The woman before her wore the same face, a mirror image blurred by years and sorrow. Hair-streaked silver eyes etched deep with fear and fatigue. But there was more, a shuddering, haunted presence, as if every memory in the world was pressing down on her all at once. This Avery, older, frailer, dressed in a gray coat dusted with cobwebs, and time wore a mask, a simple white porcelain thing, painted with her own features but cracked across the mouth. For a long, impossible second, they just stared at each other in the dimness, the silence of the corridor broken only by the electric hum of the lights. Then the future. Avery raised a shaking finger to her lips, urging quiet. The present, Avery stepped back, half ready to flee, half hypnotized. "It's really you," Avery whispered, voice small and breaking. The masked woman nodded, lowering her hand. Her voice, when it came, was rough, rusted from disuse and heartbreak. "I'm sorry," she said. "You're not supposed to see me yet." I hoped her words failed. She pressed a trembling hand to the wall for support, the mask shifting slightly. Behind it, tears glimmered. "Who are you?" Avery's voice was hardly her own. "What is this? Am I dead?" The woman's laugh was hollow and sharp. "Worse. You're alive, but you're stuck. Stuck in a cycle you think you're solving. I thought I could break it." I chased the answer, the logic, the tapes. I was so sure if I solved the puzzle I'd win. But every time you solve it, it just resets. It needs someone to keep the loop alive. I forgot the most important step. I never got out. She drew closer. The face behind the mask twisted with regret and terror. You can't save them all, Avery. And you can't save yourself by being the hero. I've tried. We've tried over and over. The room will let you think you're free, but it's already learned you. It can copy you, make you part of it. She pressed something small and cold into Avery's palm, a cassette tape, its label cracked and nearly unreadable. Avery stared down at it, heart pounding. She tried to ask, but the future Avery shook her head. There isn't much time, she whispered. If you see the door open, don't go through. Don't believe what the room shows you. Listen to the tape. It's from Eliza. She found a crack in the loop. I tried to follow her voice, but I waited too long. I let the room name me instead of naming myself. Her fingers closed tight around Avery's hand, desperate, urgent. Promise me, Avery, don't forget. Don't let the room take your name. Play the tape and don't trust your reflection. The corridor suddenly grew colder and the lights buzzed, threatening to go out. The future Avery began to tremble, her outline flickering at the edges as if the hallway itself was pulling her backward. You have to let me go, she croaked, voice dissolving. This is the only chance you'll get. If you see me again, it's already too late. Avery, paralyzed, watched as her future self staggered back, the mask slipping to reveal a gaunt, haunted version of her own face. Their eyes met one last time, full of the longing to warn, to save, to break free, and then like a breath sucked into the dark, the future Avery vanished. The mask clattered to the ground, shattering into 100 pieces. For a moment, all Avery could hear was her own ragged breathing and the distant, inexorable ticking of the clock. She crouched, knuckles white around the cassette, and slotted it into the old tape recorder she still clung to like a lifeline. She pressed play. The tape hissed, wavered, then settled into the warm, trembling cadence of a familiar voice, a voice she hadn't heard in over 2 decades. Eliza. If you're hearing this, Eliza whispered the words, strained and desperate, it means you're still inside. Please, Avery, listen to me. Don't trust what you see. The room will make you think it's helping, but it's only copying. The moment you forget who you are, you're gone, and something will wear your face for the next cycle. I tried to warn you. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to break through. But you might be. Don't go into room 103. Don't let them write your name in the ledger. If you already have, tear the page out. Burn it. If you see your own reflection, move before you do, run. It's never too late until the clock chimes midnight. Please, Avery, remember who you love. Remember who you are. The tape ran out with a click, the sound impossibly final. Avery sat on the cold floor, tears streaking her cheeks, the mask shards glinting like broken teeth around her. For the first time, hope and terror warred in her chest. She could end the loop, but only if she trusted herself, only if she could hold on to her name and memory as the room tried to pry them away. Somewhere far off, the grandfather clock began to chime, deep and mournful, counting down the minutes to midnight. Avery pressed her fist to her chest, the tape still clutched tight, and whispered the only thing that might save her. I am Avery Quinn. I am not the story. I am the storyteller. And I will get out. Avery stood frozen outside the thick metal door, marked Control Archive. Her pulse thudding against the base of her skull, sweat icy on her neck. The narrow corridor vibrated with the muffled drone of machinery, the whir and tick of invisible gears. Above the handle, a panel blinked green. For the first time, her own face reflected ghost-like in the plexiglass, fractured and uncertain as if daring her to step inside. She hesitated only a moment. The tape of Eliza's warning was still warm in her pocket, its edges smudged with the trembling of her hands. Don't let them write your name in the ledger. Burn it. If you see your own reflection, move before you do, run. Avery steeled herself, punched the code she'd seen scrawled in the dust of the broken mask, 103, and pushed through. The room inside was not like the rest of the inn. Where the halls had been choked with gloom and age, this place was ice cold, lit by rows of humming servers, stacked ceiling-high blue lights, blinking in sequences that reminded her of a heart beating in the dark. Racks of tapes lined the walls, each labeled in careful hand: Jordan F97AA, Eliza Q97B, Miles R97C, dozens, no hundreds of names she didn't know. Shelves overflowed with notebooks, Polaroids, vials of hair and bone jars of yellowed teeth, trophies of memory. It was an archive of every loop, every failed escape, every person the room had ever claimed. Avery's knees almost buckled. Her own name was here too. Avery Q 2023. Written in looping black ink, the tape untouched, waiting. She moved quickly. The humming grew louder, filling her head with a kind of static, as if the room was warning her. This is not for you, not for you, not for you. But she pressed on, searching the shelves for the tapes that mattered. She found Eliza's first. Eliza Q97B tape, brittle in its plastic case label, worn by years of handling. She found Jordan's beside it, a twin Jordan F97A. Both tapes vibrated slightly in her palm, as if the memories inside were alive, restless, desperate for release. She slipped both into her satchel, then fumbled for the flashlight, a battered, ancient maglite, the only thing that had felt real since this nightmare began. She flicked it on. The beam was sharp and pure, a pillar of light slicing through dust and memory. At the center of the room, a single steel table. Its surface was scored by burn marks and melted plastic, as if others had tried and failed to destroy what was kept here. Avery reached into her pocket and pulled out a battered book of matches. One left the cardboard nearly soft with sweat, but it was enough. She laid the two tapes, Eliza's and Jordan's, side by side, heart-pounding, vision blurry with the pressure of fate. She struck the match flame trembling and set it to the edge of the maglite's lens. The old bulb flickered, then caught burning hot, casting a wild, stuttering shadow across the racks of memory. Avery held the flame to the tapes, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a hiss, like breath, sucked through teeth, the plastic curled and blackened, the labels shriveling, the scent of burning acetate thickening the air. The room reacted at once. All around her, the blue lights flashed red, alarms keening low and mournful. The tapes on the shelves began to vibrate, then rattle, then leap, as if trying to escape their own history. The temperature dropped, and the air filled with a thunderous noise, 1,000 voices whispering at once, fighting to be heard, desperate not to be erased. Avery gritted her teeth, forcing herself not to turn away. The burning tape spat sparks and smoke, the acrid stench stinging her nose, her eyes. The floor beneath her feet began to shudder, the walls flexing as if the room itself was being torn in two. Then came the gray. It started at the edges, a thin mist crawling along the baseboards, swallowing color, turning the world monochrome. The blue and red lights winked out, replaced by a shifting fog that painted everything in shades of memory gray, shadows, dancing where racks of evidence had been, faces pressed into the cloud, wide-eyed and pleading. Avery stumbled, choking on the haze. She staggered to the table, gripping its edge for balance, and felt the metal liquefy beneath her hand, reforming into something that pulsed and shivered. She saw flashes Eliza's face, young and bright, then twisted in terror. Jordan's eyes pleading through the glass of the tape. Her own reflection flickering and multiplying until it filled the whole room. A voice boomed through the fog. Not a voice, not really, but a vibration in the bones of her skull. You have destroyed the memory. Now you must choose, become the copy or become the witness. Avery gasped, searching for something, anything that might anchor her. The tapes continued to burn the flames, licking at the grayness, warping the room in a feverish spiral. She saw doors open and close in the mist, one leading back into the loop, safe and familiar. One leading forward into blinding light, uncharted and perilous. She remembered Eliza's words. If you see the door open, don't go through. Tear the page out. Burn it. Remember who you love. The grayness thickened, drawing her limbs heavy. The door behind her, the one back to room 103, glowed faintly, the numbers shimmering in ghostly white. The door ahead, featureless, but beckoning, pulsed with an insistent light, painful to look at, promising nothing except change. Avery reached inside herself for the memory that would not be taken. She called up her mother's laugh, her sister's hand in hers. On the last day of childhood, the pain and joy of her own name spoken aloud. She pressed these memories to her chest as the room buckled and spun. The flames reached the table, igniting piles of forgotten notes and broken cassette cases. The room howled a cyclone of fury and grief, as if every lost soul was being sucked through a keyhole at once. Avery screamed, the sound torn from her lips by the rushing wind, and threw herself toward the door that promised freedom, letting go of every false memory, every whisper that tried to name her as a copy. The grayness tried to drag her back, hands clawing at her ankles. Voices tempting her with easy oblivion, the ache of repetition, but she dug in her heels, shouting her name to the nothing. I am Avery Quinn. I am not your memory. A final jolt, the sensation of falling and flying, burning and freezing. And Avery burst through the threshold into the blinding white beyond. Behind her, the archive burned. The room shuddered, split, and collapsed, taking the loops, the false names, the hungry gray with it. Ahead, silence, and the first hint of sunlight she'd seen in what felt like forever. Avery awoke to the sterile humming quiet of a hospital room. The world felt freshly laundered, too clean, too bright, the smell of antiseptic. A sharp, bracing contrast to the mildew and dust that had clung to her in the endless corridors of Maple Hollow Inn. Her first instinct was to bolt upright, to scan for doors, mirrors, shadows that didn't belong. But her body was heavy, cocooned in blankets, the IV in her arm biting cold against her skin. The ceiling above her was blank and white. For the first time in what felt like years, there was no flicker at the edge of her vision, no gray mist curling around her thoughts. She breathed slow and shaky. The clock on the far wall caught her eye, the hands frozen unyielding at 10:03. Avery felt her chest tighten. That's the moment she realized, a whisper of dread threading through her, the hour they vanished, the hour everything always comes undone. She forced herself to look away to gather her senses. The room was empty except for the gentle sound of beeping and the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. A stack of magazines lay untouched at her bedside, a single Get Well card propped up next to a cup of plastic daisies. She reached for it with trembling fingers, but the words on the card, "Welcome back, Avery. You did it. Come home soon," offered more confusion than comfort. A gentle knock sounded at the door. Avery flinched, her pulse quickening. She expected, without meaning to, that someone else would walk through that other Avery, hair streaked with silver eyes, hollow and lost. But it was only a nurse smiling with practiced warmth, clipboard in hand. "Good morning, Miss Quinn. How are you feeling?" Avery struggled for her voice, tired, confused. She searched the nurse's face for some hint of duplicity, some crack in the mask. But the nurse only nodded, made a note, and said softly, "You've been through a lot. Your mother's just down the hall. She's awake. Would you like to see her?" Avery nodded, a knot in her throat. The nurse left quietly, and for a moment Avery was alone with the clock and the relentless certainty of time's passage or its refusal to move. She swung her legs off the bed, testing the floor's solidity, half expecting it to ripple beneath her feet like the gray mist had. But the linoleum was cool, steady, and it held her. Her mother was waiting when she stepped through the door, sitting up in her own hospital bed, eyes alert and clear, for the first time in months, maybe years. The confusion, the fog, the heartbreak all seemed to have lifted. Her hands trembled as Avery crossed the room and fell into her embrace. "Mom," Avery choked, burying her face in her mother's shoulder. "You're awake." Her mother smiled, soft and real. The woman Avery remembered from childhood shining through. "You came back to me," she said, voice thick with tears. "I thought I'd lost you too." They held each other, the silence between them gentle, the kind of peace that only follows a storm. For a long time there were no words. Then Avery's mother reached to the table beside her and picked up a photo frame Avery didn't recognize. "This came for you," she said, pressing it into Avery's hands. "They said it was waiting when you woke up." Avery stared at the picture, heart pounding. It was a simple snapshot, taken on a bright spring day, a blue sky behind them. She saw herself younger, but unmistakably her wearing a graduation gown and cap. Beside her stood Eliza, radiant, and Jordan beaming, their arms draped over one another's shoulders. All three smiling, alive, present. It looked as if the picture had always existed, like their lives had never been interrupted by the shadow of Maple Hollow, like the tragedy had been rewritten. But Avery's hands shook as she turned the photo over. No date, no note, just the echo of memory, fragile and new. The relief that should have come never did. The clock on the wall still read 10:03. The nurse returned, smiling, checking the monitors, oblivious to the tension building in Avery's chest. "You've got visitors," she said gently, "and you're safe now. The doctors say you're going to be just fine." Avery wanted to believe her. She wanted to let herself be held by the illusion of safety, to trust that the story was over, that she'd won. But the edges of her vision flickered just a little, and the room felt too still, too carefully arranged. She set the photo frame on the table, trying to ignore the way her own eyes seemed to follow her, even from the smiling image. Her mother squeezed her hand. "You look tired, sweetheart. Why don't you rest a bit?" Avery nodded, easing back into the chair beside her mother's bed. Her eyelids fluttered heavy with exhaustion. But just before sleep claimed her, her phone silent since before her descent into the inn, buzzed on the bedside table. Avery stared at the notification, dread coiling in her stomach. The message was from an unknown number. No contact, no history. Not everyone leaves room 103. Someone new always takes the old place. A shiver skittered down her spine. The world outside the window looked unchanged. Sunlight glinting off cars, nurses passing in the hall, the gentle hum of ordinary life. But the words hung in the air heavier than the room itself. Avery looked again at the clock, 10:03, unmovable. She squeezed her mother's hand tighter. "Mom, do you remember what happened to Eliza?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Her mother's brow furrowed, a shadow flickering in her eyes. "Of course, honey. You all made it. You all came home." Avery wanted to believe it. She stared at the photo, her own face smiling back. Eliza and Jordan alive, the past rewritten. She wanted to believe in second chances in memory, restored in the possibility that the nightmare was over. But the clock did not move. And the message pulsed on her phone, a warning, a curse, a truth she couldn't erase. No one ever leaves room 103. Only the names change. Avery closed her eyes, pressing her palm to the photo, her mind awash with questions. Was she really free? Or had she only become the new memory? The latest copy her life, a patch stitched over a tear in time. In the end, she let herself rest her mother's hand in hers, the sunlight soft on her face. But in the back of her mind, the door to room 103 stood open, waiting as it always had for the next name to step inside. Avery stood at the window of her small apartment, clutching the faded photo in one hand and the VHS tape in the other. The hospital had discharged her. Only that morning, the world outside washed in a gentle gray rain that made the city streets run like rivers. Her mother was home, lucid, whole, humming a tune in the kitchen, as if the years of silence and confusion had been a fever dream. On the living room table, the picture of all three of them, Avery, Eliza, Jordan, still smiled with impossible warmth. But the clock on the wall, new batteries freshly loaded, refused to move past 10:03. The phone vibrated, one screen lighting up with another message. "You're close, Avery. Not everyone chooses. Some just become." She looked at herself in the window's reflection, searching for any sign that her face was borrowed or her smile rehearsed. She pressed her forehead to the cold glass, remembering every moment in Maple Hollow, the dread, the loop, the taste of ash and memory in her mouth. She thought of Jordan's eyes, the sound of her sister's voice on the last tape, the whispered warning from her future self. There had to be a way to end it, not just for herself, but for everyone whose story had been twisted, erased, overwritten by the room that refused to forget. Avery slipped the VHS tape into her backpack, along with a simple note written in block letters. "I choose to be the last memory." Then, as quietly as she had come, she left her apartment and stepped into the rain. The drive north was a blur of headlights and wet roads. The radio silent except for the static that rose every time she passed a lonely stretch of highway. She reached Maple Hollow just as the sun dipped beneath the clouds, casting the ruins in the kind of ghostly gold reserved for stories about miracles and hauntings. The inn's charred bones still poked from the earth, but where the main entrance once stood, a new door had been fitted, fresh paint peeling only at the corners, as if time couldn't quite decide whether to destroy or restore. Avery paused before the door, heart hammering. The air was thick with rain and the scent of pine. She reached for the knob, surprised when it turned easily under her palm. Inside, the familiar corridor stretched away, impossibly intact. The wallpaper was the same faded blue. She remembered the light bulbs flickering in their sockets. The sign over the archway. Room 103 guests only glowed faintly, letters shifting just out of focus as if rewritten by an unsteady hand. She walked slowly, feeling the walls close in with every step, memories crowding her like ghosts. The door to room 103 was ajar, and she pushed it open, half expecting to see herself already inside. But the room was empty. Dust floated in the sunlight, settling on the once plush carpet. The bed was made with military precision, and on the nightstand, a battered VHS player, weighted power cord trailing to the socket like a leash. She set the tape beside it, hands shaking. She sat on the edge of the bed, listening to her own breath, waiting for the fear to settle, for the panic to rise. Instead, there was only the slow, inevitable calm of a choice made at the edge of the world. Avery unfolded her note and placed it beside the tape. Her fingers brushed the plastic cold reel, the last piece of a puzzle that had haunted her since childhood. She whispered into the silence words she needed the room to hear. Let them go. Take me instead. I choose to be the last memory. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the lamp on the bedside table flickered, and the television, silent for decades, buzzed to life. Static filled the screen, crackling and hissing until the image cleared. Avery watched, unable to look away, as the room on the screen became her own, a mirror of this moment, only slightly askew. She saw herself older, tired, sitting on the edge of the same bed, the tape in her hand. Behind her, Eliza and Jordan appeared, their faces soft with gratitude and sorrow. Avery's future self turned to the camera, tears streaming down her cheeks, and spoke words Avery could barely make out. You're free. Remember who you are. Live for all of us. Suddenly, the lights went out. The room plunged into a black so complete that Avery's own heartbeat seemed to echo in her ears. The clock on the wall began to tick again, second hand lurching forward with painful slowness. 04, 10, 05, 10, 06. With each tick, Avery felt the weight of memory pressing against her chest, threatening to drown her in all the lives and losses room 103 had swallowed. She squeezed her eyes shut, gripping the tape, forcing herself to remember not the pain, not the terror, but the laughter of her sister, the warmth of Jordan's embrace, her mother's hand in hers as a child. She poured every good memory she had into the darkness, refusing to become another ghost, another shadow on the wall. When she opened her eyes, the room had changed. The bed was stripped bare, dust motes swirling in the pale dawn light. The walls were empty, the mirror on the dresser cracked and clouded. Avery stood alone, but for the first time she felt real, solid, whole, her heartbeat, her own. She walked to the window and looked outside. The rain had stopped. The world beyond the inn was bright, the mountains sharp against a sky clearing for the first time in weeks. Her phone buzzed one last time, a single message, no sender, no reply option. You chose. The memory is yours. They are free. Avery turned away from room 103, closing the door behind her. This time it did not try to follow. The corridor stretched away in silence, the air warm with the promise of morning. When she returned home, her mother met her at the door. Eyes clear, smile trembling with relief. The clock on the wall ticked forward, steady and sure. And the photo on the table held only Avery and her mother. No more ghosts, no more impossible rewrites. Avery pressed the now blank VHS tape into her desk drawer, knowing she would never need to play it again. She sat beside her mother, watched the sunrise, and for the first time since she could remember, let herself hope the story was truly hers at last. Avery pressed her hand against the battered surface of room 103's door, feeling its grain beneath her palm. All was silent, so silent she could hear the dull thud of her own heart, the faint tick of her watch, the hollow ache of waiting. Rain trickled down the hallway window behind her, the light outside already beginning to fade toward dusk. It was the same hour, always the same hour, as if the world was waiting too. Then, as if summoned by her thoughts, the door creaked open. No hand turning the knob, no breath of wind, just an inevitability, as quiet and certain as memory. Inside room 103 was unchanged and yet impossibly transformed. Gone was the dust, the scent of old smoke and forgotten sorrow. The room glowed with the soft golden light of late afternoon, as though it were untouched by the years or by tragedy. And there, gathered around the small round table in the center of the room, sat Jordan, Eliza, and Miles. They looked as they had in every photograph, every vanished dream, young bright-eyed laughter half caught between bites of something warm and homemade. Eliza's hair tumbled over her shoulder as she leaned in, whispering something that made Jordan snort with laughter. Miles was reaching for the salt shaker, his grin wide and careless. For a moment, Avery stood frozen in the doorway, afraid to breathe. The weight of all the years, all the lost moments pressed in on her like water. She swallowed hard, gripping the VHS tape so tightly the plastic cut into her palm. Jordan looked up first, and as his eyes met Avery's, something flickered in his gaze. Recognition, confusion, then the slow, dawning fear of someone waking from a nightmare they can't quite recall. "Avery," he said, voice hoarse. "Is that—" The words trailed away. Eliza turned her mouth open, eyes wide. Miles nearly dropped his fork. Avery stepped inside the tape, trembling in her grasp. She didn't know how to explain. How could she when she herself was barely holding together the lines between memory and reality, past and present? But the room felt urgent now, the air crackling with electricity, with expectation. She walked to the table and set the tape down in the center. The label, now scrawled with her own handwriting, read simply, "Memory set free." None of them reached for it at first. Eliza stared at it as if it might explode. Jordan's jaw flexed, muscles jumping beneath his skin. Miles just watched, silent, a frown creasing his forehead. Then Avery spoke, her voice raw but steady. "This is for you," she said. "You left something behind. I'm here to give it back." Jordan reached out, first fingertips brushing the tape. For an instant, the room seemed to shudder. The lights flickered, not with menace, but with the tenderness of tears unshed. Eliza let out a small, strangled gasp. "It's true, isn't it?" she whispered. "We never left this room. We just stayed. All this time." Avery nodded, tears burning her eyes. "But now you can go. You remember, don't you? Everything." As one, the three looked at each other, then at Avery and at the tape. The air filled with the scent of snow and pine, a memory of a winter night outside this room, so long ago. It was as if the years unspooled in reverse, the fire, the screaming wind, the door slamming shut. Jordan's hands trembled, and for a moment, Avery saw every version of him, at once the lost boy, the laughing friend, the fading ghost. One by one, they touched the tape. A charge ran through the room, crackling like static. Eliza squeezed Avery's hand, her skin cool and real, her eyes bright with something like relief. "We can remember now," she whispered. "We can go back." As the words left her lips, the world began to shift. Color bled from their cheeks, the solidity of their bodies softened at the edges, as if they were being washed away by a gentle tide. Miles looked down at his hands, flexing his fingers in wonder. "I can feel it," he said, voice echoing oddly. "It's like I'm waking up from a dream. But the dream was here, and the world is out there." Avery could barely see through her tears. "It's time," she said softly. "You're free. You're going home." The clock above the bed ticked forward, 10:03, flickering to 10:04. The light through the window changed golden, deepening to blue. Jordan stood first, taking Eliza's hand. Miles rose uncertain, as if expecting the room to pull him back. But nothing stopped them. They walked toward the door, Avery stepping aside, and as each crossed the threshold, they grew fainter outlines, blurring like mist in sunlight. They smiled, not in sorrow, but with the gentlest gratitude. Eliza paused, brushing Avery's cheek with her thumb, and Avery felt it, a spark of warmth. The memory of 1,000 shared stories of love that could never be erased by time or loss. "Thank you, Eliza," said voice, a whisper that was also a shout. "Remember us?" Then she was gone. Jordan turned at the last moment, his face full of every possible future that had ever been stolen from him. "See you outside, Ave," he said with a crooked grin. Miles winked, already a silhouette, and vanished before his laughter faded. And then the room was empty. The golden light dimmed, the dust settled. Avery was alone, the tape cold beneath her hand. She crossed to the window and watched as the world outside changed, trees springing to life, snow falling upward, the seasons winding in reverse. Far in the distance, she saw three figures walking arm in arm into the winter of 1997, returning to their lives, to their choices, to everything that had been taken. Avery let the tears fall, grief and joy twisting in her chest. The door behind her closed softly, as if thanking her, as if promising that for now at least, room 103 would hold no one else hostage. She took a breath and turned away, the memory of her friends fresh and bright in her mind. Outside, the world was waiting. And for the first time in 26 years, it was hers again. Avery awoke to the muted hum of city life filtered through the thin curtains of a rented flat she didn't remember choosing. For a few seconds, as the light crept across the ceiling, she almost believed it had all been a dream. She sat up, her hands searching the nightstand for her phone, but instead closed on the familiar weight of her old field notebook, the battered dog-eared one she had always kept with her during investigations, the one that contained every secret she'd ever been desperate to unravel. She opened the cover, and her breath caught. Every page was blank, save for a single line scrawled across the inside cover, the ink shockingly dark and fresh. Avery Quinn, gatekeeper of memory. Her chest tightened with a flash of grief panic, then a cold, quiet realization. The world outside moved on. There were no photos of her in the apartment, no calls on her phone, no texts. Her email, once crowded with leads and notes from editors, was empty. The walls around her seemed thinner, the world less substantial, as if she were living in the negative of a photograph outlined but never truly filled in. Avery dressed in silence and left the flat, walking the streets as a ghost among the living. She passed the newsstand where the clerk used to nod at her every morning. But he looked right through her. She stopped by the hospital where her mother had spent her final days. But the woman at reception, familiar but altered, shook her head when Avery asked about patient records. "We don't have anyone by that name." "Sorry." Her voice was kind but empty, as if Avery were asking about a character in an old novel. At her former office, a little glass-walled studio above a bakery, Avery found only a stack of unopened mail and dust motes drifting in the afternoon light. The name on the door had been replaced. There was no trace of her desk, no bulletin board crowded with clippings and strings of red yarn. It was as if Avery Quinn had never been there, as if her whole life had been erased the moment she closed the door to room 103. It was supposed to hurt. And at first it did. Avery wandered the city with a kind of gentle numbness, letting herself disappear into the crowd. She watched couples fight in parks, watched strangers meet, watched children play hopscotch on the sidewalk. Life moved on the way it always had, untroubled by the holes left behind. But there was a peace in it too, a healing slow and persistent, like grass pushing through cracked pavement. She no longer felt the weight of her own story, the crushing sense of being the only one who remembered what had happened at Maple Hollow Inn. There was freedom in anonymity, in knowing she had given everything she could to bring Eliza Jordan and Miles home. Then, on a gray morning, when the air tasted of rain, Avery's steps carried her to a second-hand electronics shop, tucked into a forgotten corner of the city. She was drawn in by habit, the memory of 1,000 dead recorders and tangled cords from her reporter days. She drifted toward the counter, and her eyes caught on an old battered podcast recorder, her model, the one she'd lost months ago. Its familiar scratches and dents stood out even in the dim light. Without thinking, she lifted it to her ear. For a moment there was only static, the low hiss of time lost. Then a voice broke through, clear, warm, achingly familiar. "Thank you, Avery." Eliza's voice, soft, steady, full of love and freedom. Avery pressed her hand to her mouth, tears stinging her eyes. The message was short, just those 3 words. But it was enough. The world might have forgotten, her might have scrubbed her name from every record, but here was proof someone remembered. Someone was free. Avery left the shop, the recorder pressed to her heart, the words echoing in her mind. That night, she sat by her window, watching the city lights blur into constellations on the wet glass. She wrote in her blank notebook not stories or evidence, but names. Jordan, Eliza, Miles, her own too. She let herself remember, let the tears fall, let the healing come. Months passed. Spring arrived. The world continued to move, unaware that one of its own had chosen to bear the memories no one else could carry. But every now and then, a letter would appear, no return address, just a crisp envelope with a single line inside. Avery Quinn, gatekeeper of memory. Sometimes there was a pressed flower inside, or a photograph of a snowy landscape, or a hotel key stamped 103. Each was a quiet affirmation, a secret handshake from those who knew what had been sacrificed, what had been saved. Avery learned to smile again. She took small jobs, helped neighbors, became a presence in her building. The woman with the kind eyes, the one who listened. No one remembered where she came from. She never minded. She carried her healing with her, a quiet purpose, a promise kept. And every time she saw a group of friends laughing together, every time a mother hugged her child, every time she glimpsed her own face reflected in the window, solid real whole, she whispered back to Eliza, to Jordan, to the world, "I remember you. You're free." The world spun on. Maple Hollow Inn was lost to history, room 103, silent and empty. But memory true. Memory lived stitched into the life of the one who had chosen to stay. Avery Quinn, never forgotten. The gatekeeper holding the door between the lost and the found. The glow of midnight flickered across the city skyline as Riley Torres, 24, fiercely curious and just 3 months into her job at the Tribune, rubbed her eyes, scrolling through the last batch of emails before shutting her laptop. Rain tapped the window in a nervous staccato. Most of the messages were the usual press releases, calendar reminders, a heated thread about the new coffee machine. Then her cursor hovered over an unfamiliar sender subject line, empty, timestamp 2:31 a.m. There was no preview, just a file icon and a single cryptic phrase in the body: room 103 isn't finished. She hesitated. Riley wasn't naive. She'd already covered one cybercrime beat and could smell a phishing attempt a mile away. But there was something about the brevity, the cool assurance in those words, the sense of a secret not quite buried. She moved the cursor to the attachment, a video file named Last Entry MP4. She double-checked her antivirus, then opened it in a sandboxed player, heart thumping louder than the rain. The video flickered to life with a burst of static, then sharpened a woman, mid-30s. Tired eyes, hair tumbling loose over a parka, stepping into a dim corridor. She carried a notebook and a battered tape recorder, pausing before an old wooden door, the brass plate reading 103. The hallway behind her was lined with peeling wallpaper, the light above flickering in and out of existence, like the heartbeat of something old and restless. Riley leaned closer, chills tracing her spine. The timestamp on the video, October 2023. She watched as the woman, Avery Quinn Riley, realized with a start, her face half remembered from a byline about cold cases, reached for the doorknob. The camera jostled as if held in trembling hands. Avery turned her face, catching the camera's gaze. Her lips parted as if she meant to say something to warn, but instead she simply looked straight through the lens, through Riley, through time. There was movement behind Avery. Shadows curling in the corners, reflections warping in the battered mirror by the door. Riley pressed pause, her breath fogging the screen. In the still frame, Avery's eyes seemed impossibly alive, begging, pleading. She hit play. Avery stepped inside, vanishing into darkness. The door swung shut, the echo of the latch thunderous. The camera lingered on the peeling numbers 103 before the feed cut to static. Then came the whisper. It wasn't audio exactly. It was inside Riley's head, threading through the bones behind her ears. A dozen voices braided together. Choose well, and you'll be remembered. Choose wrong, and you'll be kept. Riley shuddered, jerking back from the screen, blinking against the prickling sensation along her scalp. She rewound the video. This time she watched frame by frame. At the very edge of the picture, behind Avery's shadow, another face, a blurred, stretched shape, lips curling, eyes hollow, flickered, and was gone. Riley closed her laptop, hands trembling. But the words, the rules echoed, refusing to fade. Choose well, be remembered. Choose wrong, be kept. She stood, stretching sore muscles, trying to shake off the chill crawling under her skin. But her inbox pinged again. Another message from the same anonymous sender. No text, just a link. The URL was unfamiliar, an archived police report from 1997 referencing 3 missing students last seen at the Maple Hollow Inn, British Columbia. Room 103, circled in red. Names faded with age. Jordan Baker, Eliza Monroe, Miles Carter. Below a handwritten note, reporter on file, Avery Quinn. Case status unresolved. Riley's mouth went dry. She looked at her notebook, then at the recorder on her desk, almost an exact match to the one in the video. She hadn't bought it. She didn't remember when it had appeared in her bag. Rain hammered the window. She heard the click of a latch, a door closing in the apartment down the hall, or maybe in her own mind. She scrolled back to the original message, read it again. Room 103 isn't finished. She typed a quick reply. Who are you? What do you want? But the send button was gray, unresponsive. The address had already vanished from her contacts. Riley closed her laptop for the second time, checked her reflection in the blackened screen. For a heartbeat, she swore she saw someone standing behind her. A tall figure blurred the faintest imprint of a smile. She stood and moved to the door, testing the knob. It opened as always onto her hallway. But for just a moment before the lights flickered on, she imagined the faded outline of a brass plaque on the opposite wall 103. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Riley lay awake, replaying the video in her mind. The echo of Avery's footsteps. The hush of the door closing. The final, inescapable whisper. Choose well. Weeks passed. Riley tried to dismiss the whole thing, a prank, a ghost story. But she found herself researching cold cases, digging into the vanished history of the Maple Hollow Inn, following Avery's trail through old digital footprints and archived podcasts. The story began to swallow her, and she let it drawn deeper by each thread she tugged. One evening, exhausted, she booted her laptop and found a new message. This time, there was no attachment. Just a single line pulsing in the center of the screen. The door is open. Are you coming? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Somewhere in the circuitry of the city, a door swung quietly shut. And in the silence that followed, Riley listened, waiting like so many before her, for the invitation to come again. For room 103, for memory, for the story that never ever ends.